taking their seats and being ready to go. So I am going to call this meeting of the Governor's Water Policy Council to order. And I'll have some introductory remarks, but first, as usual, I'll turn to Trent to go over meeting logistics.
Good morning, everyone. Just to go over logistics so everyone's aware, please note that this meeting is being broadcast via webinar and is also being recorded. The recording and meeting materials will be posted to the council webpage. Only members of the council listening online will be able to unmute themselves and participate in the meeting. For those online and in the room, make sure to unmute yourself and identify yourself before speaking. And those online, if you have technical issues, please call the ADWR help desk at 602-771-8444 or email tickets@azwater.gov.
Okay, thanks, Trent. If we can go to the next slide. So again, welcome to the fourth council meeting of 2023. I am expecting this to be the final meeting of the year. There has been a lot of urgency to the work of this council because of the charge by the governor to address these really important issues facing the state of Arizona. And of course, council was asked to come up with a suite of recommendations by December of this year. I appreciate the time and effort of council members, both in these council meetings and in the committee meetings. I know you have invested a lot of time to allow us to meet the charge of Governor Hobbs. Just a few weeks ago in October, the council recommended two proposals move forward to the governor: the alternative pathway to designation of assured water supply and build to rent. Today, we will consider one additional assured water supply committee proposal to address wildcat development, as well as two proposals from the Rural Groundwater Committee, a framework for the groundwater management outside the AMAs and INAs, and to expand voluntary measuring and reporting in these areas. The Rural Groundwater proposal is based on components that have received extensive input. The proposal has had robust input through the committee process and in many individual meetings with committee members and stakeholders. And that input is reflected in the consensus proposal. There's broad consensus in the groups around what has been developed, and we recognize that consensus is not unanimity. We have heard and noted dissenting opinions, and will continue to recognize them today. Comments and dissenting opinions have been captured, and they are reflected in the committee materials posted on the website. The proposals that are being brought to the council today were identified as priorities by the committees. There are many other issues and concepts that have been raised, although interconnected. Addressing everything at once isn't practical or possible. These proposals provide concrete steps forward that this council can continue to build on in the months and years ahead, working through other concepts that have been identified. Collectively, these are major steps forward in water policy for our state. So before moving to the agenda slide, I'm going to ask Trent to call the roll as we usually do. Trent.
Thank you. Like usual, let us know, make sure to turn on your mic and let us know if you are online or an alternate. Patrick Adams. Present. Paul Brierly.
Here.
Brenda Berman.
Here.
Cynthia Campbell.
Present.
Ed Curry.
Present.
Maria Dadgar.
Present.
Ron Doba.
Present.
Doug Dunham. Sandy Favorites.
Present.
Kathy Ferris.
Here.
Representative Gail Griffin. Spencer Camps.
Here.
Jamie Kelly.
Present.
John Kamik.
Present.
Chris Kuzdas,
Present.
Sharon Magdal, Leslie Myers,
Present.
Joe Olson,
Present.
Haley Paul,
Here.
Aaron Peters,
Here.
Sarah Porter,
Yeah.
Clark Princell,
Here.
Robin Sahid,
Present online.
Joe Singleton,
Here.
Abe Springer,
Present online.
Greg Sullivan,
Present.
Senator Priya Sundaration,
Present online.
Warren Tenney,
Paul Berglund substituting for Warren Tenney.
Tom Torres,
Director Torres is not here, but Bill Boyd, his alternate, is.
Representative Stacy Travers, Chris Udall,
Here with my alternate.
Sandra Watson,
Here.
Victor Becker, Chairwoman Amelia Flores,
Present via WebEx.
Governor Stephen Rowe Lewis,
Don Pongrace for Governor Lewis online.
and Chairman Robert Miguel. Thank you.
Thanks, Trent. Before we proceed, anyone else we might have missed online? Anyone we missed in the room? And I see Chairman Miguel is joining us. Thanks, Chairman. We understand Daniel Schwiebert is online for alternate for Representative Griffin. Anyone else we missed? All right, I'll also note that additional DWR staff here at the table, Bruce Hallen, advisor to the director, Carol Ward, assistant director, Emily Petrick, deputy counsel, Trent Blomberg, council coordinator. We also have Jim Knupp, deputy director of the Department of Real Estate, joining us online. That will be important when we get into the Wildcat development issue as well. So if we can call up the meeting agenda on the next slide. Again, there's a lot to cover on this agenda, including action items. We will quickly move through the presentation to review focus areas, objectives, principles, and process. But the guts of today's discussions are the proposed recommendations regarding Wildcat development, rural groundwater framework, measuring and reporting. So please keep that in mind, and let's leave plenty of time for discussion of those recommendations. And again, I will be seeking the council's final feedback on those recommendations today. So the focus areas and objectives for the council on this slide. As you know, there are two focus areas for the council in 2023, the Assured Water Supply Program and rural groundwater management. Both are critical and both require solutions now. So one is to review and make recommendations to the Assured Water Supply policies to address the challenges revealed by the Assured Water Supply modeling projections, and the other to develop recommendations for a water management framework to assist rural Arizona communities to manage their groundwater resources. We made great progress since the council's first meeting in May of this year. And at the end of this meeting, I expect to have a suite of recommendations on these issues to provide to the governor. Next slide. I will now turn over the presentation to Carol Ward to review the Assured Water Supply Committee work. Carol.
Thank you, Director, and good morning, council members. As the committee has worked to review the Assured Water Supply Program and make recommendations, we have done so under a set of critical guiding principles that bear repeating. Proposals must protect the strength and integrity of the Assured Water Supply Program. Proposals should enable future growth without reliance on mined groundwater. Proposals may not reduce the 100-year requirement or increase the depth to which groundwater may be pumped. Proposals must ensure there is water before growth. And finally, proposals must protect consumers. We reviewed the committee's progress at the last council meeting in some detail. Today, I will recap at a very high level. Since our first meeting in June, the committee and ADWR staff submitted more than 30 concepts for consideration and discussed many of them, narrowing the list to high priority concepts for further development. By August, the committee was actively developing and discussing proposals to address the issue of build-to-rent communities, wildcat development, and retiring grandfathered rights. The concept that would become the alternative pathway to designation of assured water supply was under development at that point. The September 12th meeting was devoted entirely to discussion of the assured water supply model. At the September 27th meeting, ADWR presented the concept for an alternative pathway to designation of assured water supply, or what we've been calling the ADAS proposal. In follow-up to the September meeting, ADWR continued to have discussions with stakeholders, answering questions and soliciting and receiving input. The feedback on that proposal continued to be positive. At the October 17th meeting, the committee recommended bringing the alternative path to designation of assured water supply and the build-to-rent proposals forward to the council for consideration. Most recently, at the November 14th committee meeting, ADWR staff presented a high-level proposal to address wildcat development, which the committee also recommended bringing forward to the council for consideration today. At that November meeting, the committee also reviewed remaining concepts to be discussed as the committee continues its work next year. This brings us to the final proposal advanced by the Assured Water Supply Committee for the council's consideration, the proposal to address wildcat development. The committee has done its part to develop this final high-level proposal. The committee recognizes that additional work will be necessary to complete it in the legislative process. And the committee recommends the remaining development occur outside of the council process, enabling expanded involvement and input through that legislative process. I will turn the presentation over now to Ben Altenator, ADWR's Chief Legislative Liaison, to walk the council through the background and recommendations for this proposal.
Thank you, Assistant Director Ward. Appreciate it. Again, my name is Ben Altenator. I serve as the Chief Legislative Liaison for the Department of Water Resources. I really want to start out by thanking the council for their work on this issue. Some of these issues are not native to water folks, and so for us to delve into it was good, and I appreciate a lot of the feedback the council provided. Also want to thank the Department of Real Estate for their guidance on this issue as well. I'll provide a brief overview of the topic for the council and then an overview of the council or the committee recommendation to the full council. As a reminder to the council and for added context and background, given the recent experience in Rio Verde foothills and interest during the prior legislative session, there was a desire in the Assured Water Supply Committee to address some of the statutory provisions around this type of development and ensure that consumers are fully informed, address bad actors who are attempting to circumvent subdivision laws, and clarify terms such as acting in concert and contiguous with respect to subdivision law while retaining the ability to legally split lots under a certain threshold. For wildcat development, just for background, is a subdivision that's created at the county level when land is divided into 6 or more lots, parcels, or fractional interests. In an AMA, to sell or lease lots within a subdivision, an assured water supply is required. If no subdivision, obviously there's no assured water supply that's required. Continued development without an assured water supply exacerbates groundwater mining, puts homeowners at risks, and feeds negative perceptions of Arizona's ability to manage its water supply. The following recommendations that the committee put forward were born out of those challenges that were identified in discussions in the committee. Wildcat development is an informal term to characterize illegal lot splitting. Purpose of the committee recommendation is to stop those who are intentionally circumventing laws that relate to the Assured Water Supply Program and other improvements in subdivisions. Our working definition of wildcat development is proliferation of development by splitting residential parcels of 6 or more lots with the intent to circumvent laws relating to the creation of a subdivision. Next slide. So in 1997, the legislature added to the Department of Real Estate's definitions this term acting in concert. And with the addition made intent a key aspect of what the department or county must prove when finding a violation of evading subdivision laws. The change altered prior application of the law for the department, going from needing to find an objective evidentiary basis for the violation to needing to present evidence, often circumstantial, that parties intentionally collaborated to circumvent the laws. Committee comment and discussion centered around a desire to better hold accountable those looking to evade statute while not impacting legal lot splitting. Additional comment and discussion included a desire to focus solely on ownership as an iterative approach to this issue and as a metric to determine acting in concert. Providing a clear objective policy on acting in concert establishes the intent of subdivision law and when a public report is required in a community. This committee recommendation would be to strengthen measures to ensure that appropriate enforcement can be taken against those who are acting in concert to circumvent subdivision law by clarifying that ownership in 6 or more lots offered for sale or lease in 1 or more contiguous sections of land is evidence of acting in concert. Acting in concert really comes down to who owns the property. The simplest and most straightforward way to address acting in concert is related to the ownership of the property as noted on this slide. Prima facie evidence of acting in concert includes any entity, individual, or combination thereof with any ownership in 6 or more lots offered for sale or lease in 1 or more contiguous sections of land. In the graphic, you can see the orange lots in the section of land have the same ownership. Under the current statutory definition, there is some equivocation on enforcement as the 5 lots with the red oval around them do not constitute a subdivision, but jump over 1 lot to the right and you find a lot owned by the same entity. By strengthening this definition, we ensure that hopscotching around a section of land to avoid subdivision laws are thwarted. Yes, you may legally split up to 5 lots, but any more than that in this defined geographic area, and it will require a public report. The second Assured Water Supply Committee recommendation is to clarify the definition of contiguous in our state statute. In our state, historically, a barrier concept existed in statute, an administrative rule to exempt from what would otherwise be considered a common boundary or point lots and parcels from qualifying as subdivisions if the land in question was divided by natural land characteristics such as rivers, mountains, canyons, highways. Again, in 1997, the legislature broadened former agency rule to include streets and roads. This policy decision to include streets and roads significantly altered the definition of subdivisions and impacted the enforceability of subdivision law. The second committee recommendation would clarify the current definition of contiguous by using 1 or more adjoining sections of land for considering whether or not parcels are considered contiguous. Under current practice, there is ambiguity around what may constitute a common boundary or point. To strengthen the definition, the committee would propose that the definition of contiguous should be viewed from the section level. A zoomed out view is compared to a microscale view as the metric for considering whether or not parcels are considered contiguous. A section of land is 1 square mile, 640 acres. It has been in use for hundreds of years as a land use measurement dating back to the founding of our nation. The committee further recommends, as number 2, clarifying that lots separated by a street or road are contiguous. As I mentioned, historically, the Department of Real Estate and real estate industry recognized barriers as geological or man-made structures that reasonably separated lots and created distinct areas not to be considered as subdivisions. The examples I mentioned were highways, mountains, and rivers. When statute was amended to add streets and roads, in addition to highways, it complicated the application of contiguous to a point where many current and commonly understood subdivisions would not be considered as such today. So when applying contiguous or barriers to an individual or entity who is attempting to evade subdivision law, the notion of streets and roads creates significant obstacles to enforcement. Lastly, and as a reminder, the definition of a barrier, like a large natural or man-made geographic feature, would still apply to the consideration of whether lots are contiguous or not, keeping county, state, and federal highways and other natural or man-made barriers that divide parcels as non-contiguous. So to illustrate this second committee recommendation, clarifying the definition of contiguous, you can see my good artwork here. Using a section of land as the defined area for considering whether or not parcels are contiguous. If you look at graphic number 2 here, it's an example of 2 sections of land. To determine if a developer is required to obtain a public report under current law, the 5 parcels with the red circle around them are considered contiguous under the current definition. Clarifying this definition of contiguous would allow the Department of Real Estate and the county to zoom out to the section level of a map and view the section in question and any adjoining sections in question to determine common ownership interests and if a developer would need to obtain a public report. More than 5 lots offered for sale would trigger that requirement. Again, the goal here is to contain this trend of hopscotching around adjoining sections of land in order to avoid subdivision law. In graphic number 3, the blue plots of land in this graphic represent a subdivision of 6 homes, while across the street, the orange and green plots of land, while owned by the same entity, are divided by a street. There may be some equivocation as to whether they are considered a subdivision given the road that separates them. To remove any ambiguity, the committee recommends removing street and road from the definition of contiguous while ensuring that county, state, and federal highways that divide parcels would remain non-contiguous. For the third committee recommendation, current statute states that an infraction involving more than 1 lot in a subdivision is considered to be a single infraction and limits a civil penalty to $2,000 per infraction. This is likely inadequate to serving as a deterrent when considering overall costs and profits of subdividing and developing. By amending statute to a civil penalty per lot, the penalty becomes scaled to the proportion of the number of lots involved with the violation. For example, in this graphic, here are 8 lots offered for sale or lease with common ownership. So should a civil penalty be assessed, it would be $16,000, substantially more than the $2,000. This fourth and last committee recommendation gets at the heart of the timing issue that was identified as a challenge by the Department of Real Estate. A developer or subdivider is required to use county or municipal services throughout the subdivision process. At minimum, there is an application to subdivide lands, completing required surveys, obtaining building permits. Each contact is an opportunity to educate on subdivision requirements or assess whether the land represents a subdivision requiring a public report. In current statute, neither the Department of Real Estate nor counties have jurisdiction to investigate subdivision violations until after the properties are offered for sale or lease. Often when receiving as a complaint to the Department of Real Estate, there are already homes erected, streets paved, and utilities in place. This last committee recommendation would provide limited authority to counties and municipalities to collect ownership information at the time of subdivision application and application for building permit. At the time of building permit application, officials would be further provided authority to require a subdivider to obtain a subdivision public report based on the trigger of ownership information. By enabling building officials to use objective measures to determine whether a subdivision is being created prior to the issuance of building permits, the state can enable communities to earlier in the process ensure developers become compliant with subdivision law. This avoids potential issues with stranded assets of developers, allowing them to remedy this problem up front in the building process. As I mentioned, under current law, the county and the Department of Real Estate have the ability to enforce acting in concert. But given the timing issue of waiting until after the properties are offered for sale or lease, this creates the challenge we have seen play out in communities like Rio Verde Foothills. This committee recommendation is intended to really point out this timing challenge, knowing, of course, that there are a lot of innovative minds that have more experience with land use planning that need to weigh in on the impacts to the development community and the counties. As I mentioned to the committee and now to the council, I specifically want to thank the Department of Real Estate, Representative Griffin, Craig with the County Supervisors Association for providing valuable insight on how this process works at the county level, including what information is currently collected in other contexts, some additional things to consider, including resource needs and what happens when an entity is flagged. What is the county versus Department of Real Estate's role in the investigation process? And also ensuring that there are no unnecessary delays are created for the developer. We would expect a robust stakeholder group to be involved in any process moving forward. And I want to thank the members of the committee and this council who have already shown an interest in engaging in this. That leads us to our last slide. The Governor's Water Policy Council recommends the following statutory changes to address wildcat development. 4 recommendations. 1, strengthen subdivision laws by clarifying that any entity, individual, or combination thereof with any ownership in 6 or more lots offered for sale or lease in 1 or more adjoining sections of the land is evidence of acting in concert. 2, clarify the definition of contiguous when evaluating if nearby lots constitute a subdivision by using 1 or more adjoining sections of land as the defined geographic area for considering whether lots are considered contiguous. Clarifying that lots separated by a street or road are contiguous. Retaining county, state, federal highways, and natural or man-made barriers that divide lots as non-contiguous. Number 3, apply civil penalties to each lot instead of the unauthorized subdivision as a whole. And number 4, provide counties and municipalities authority to collect ownership information at the time of application for subdivision and building permits, and require a subdivider to obtain a subdivision public report based on ownership findings. With that, I'll turn it back over to the director.
Thanks, Ben. Before we start here on the discussion, I want to remind folks that at your seats, there is a printout of this council recommendation. It's probably a little tough to read depending on how far away you are from that screen. So you can use that as a reference document. Also wanted to remind folks that Real Estate Deputy Commissioner Jim Knupp has been very helpful in developing this proposal, as Ben mentioned, and ensuring that we have had robust input and vetting. He is with us online today to help answer any questions you may have. So at this time, before we get into discussion, I'll ask council members either at the table or online if they have any questions on this recommendation, either for Ben or for Jim. Jamie.
Jamie Kelly, Mojave County Water Authority. On number 1, it says strengthen the subdivision by ownership of 6 or more lots offered for sale and 1 or more adjoining sections of land. That's 640 acres. That is a very broad net. Was it the intent of the subcommittee to snare already properly subdivided lots that are they're created by a subdivision plat? Or is this directed at parcels of lands or lots created by parcel plats?
Jim, can you unmute?
Because that would get a lot of portion of my community. To sell a lot anywhere in Bullhead, you would have to have a public report once you had the 7th lot, even if it was in a legally created true subdivision.
to
Yeah,
clarify.
council member, thank you for the question. As we talked about with the subcommittee, and it certainly will be a discussion throughout after this recommendation moves forward, if that is the council's desire, that the department and the Department of Real Estate, Department of Water, as well as the subcommittee, our goal is to create an objective geographic size. The most known is sections of land. So whether we're going to end on sections of land, I think that's highly debatable, but the general idea behind this recommendation is that we can all agree at some point that there is a geographic size of land that if adjoining should be considered whenever it becomes into the acting in concert. So I think your point is well taken. We discussed it at the subcommittee level, and I know that it will be a discussion moving forward, and we will certainly engage with our stakeholders on what an appropriate geographic size is to be contemplated.
I'm not sure that addresses my concern.
I can be more specific. Some of this feedback that we've received is maybe to look at quarter sections, and that might be a more appropriate size. And that's certainly something that we would consider moving forward. And I think that certainly reduces the acreage size. But I think what we're looking for is to come up with an objective geographic size.
And again, I just wish to clarify that you're looking at all lots, whether they're created by subdivision plat or by parcel plat.
Yeah, and if they're already previously divided and they have a public report, of course, the Department of Real Estate does recognize subsequent owner exemption, and we discussed that with home builders as well as a separate conversation with yourself. We would be looking at whether it's the Department of Real Estate as well as counties are able to look at plots, lots, parcels, or fractional interests.
I'm still going to struggle because in my community, say I have 7 lots and 7 different subdivisions and they're all in one section. I have to go get a public report for 6 subdivisions because they're in 6 different subdivisions? Or do I get my own? I mean, under your current subdivision processes, how does that work?
Yeah, so as you phrased the question within one section, then yes, this recommendation would make that true. As previously said, however, I believe the stakeholder process is going to bear out that section may be a geographic size that is too large because of your very concerns that you're raising. And I think what we're going to be working toward, though, is again something based off of the public land survey sections that looks at an appropriate size of area within the section.
Clarify, Councilmember Jamie. So these are already in subdivisions that already have a public report, and you're talking about subsequent lots, correct?
Correct.
So then there's that 10-year time frame window that would be a trigger of whether or not, if you owned and were offering to sell or lease subsequent lots, whether or not you would need a public report within a section.
Yes. I mean, this is very broad. I think it's broader than what it needs to be to accomplish your goal. And particularly if the subdivision is in a city, the cities are much more restrictive than the counties in the subdivision process because of the enabling legislation. I mean, I guess one of the questions I would ask for this whole problem, do we need to be looking at the county's enabling legislation in processing subdivisions? Because the Rio Verde city happened in the county. It didn't happen in a city.
I think one of the issues that the committee fell upon when identifying this is there's no end to how far this could expand, because there are a lot of issues when you talk about wildcat development that could be included in this. We're trying to be somewhat myopic. Jim, did that clarify my question to Jamie? Did that clarify some of her question to you?
Yeah, I believe I understand her concern to be that section is too large, and we certainly hear that as a well taken suggestion to look at what an appropriate size is. And I believe we're all on the same page that we want a responsible and actionable size for the geographic, and within the sections idea, I think we can get there, whether it's again quarter sections or something larger than quarters, but at least it would be a set geographic size that makes it a presumption to be acting in concert.
I just think that whole number one bears further discussion, and I guess it can happen in a stakeholder. I think you're casting a much broader net than the problem I mean, I guess specifically, what is the issue you're looking at? Is it water assured? Because this isn't, I mean, the public report requirement would apply in non-AMA areas. But in the non-AMA areas, it's not going to get you any resolution on the water issue because we can sell dry lot subdivisions. We just have to disclose it.
Yeah, the majority of the conversation in the subcommittee was related to AMA. And council member, you're exactly correct. The Department of Real Estate will approve a public report in a non-AMA if non-water is disclosed as having a lack of water. In a non-AMA, the rules and statutes are very different than what it is in an AMA. And yeah, for the most part, the subcommittee was discussing AMA specifically.
The only thing I would add to that is that the adequate water supply program operates outside of AMAs. And of course, that ensures that water adequacy or inadequacy is disclosed in the public report provided to potential first purchasers. And then there's also mandatory adequacy jurisdictions. So counties and cities can opt into that. And that's a direct tie to a public report also.
And to add to that, Jamie Kelly, dry lot subdivisions have a notation on the front page of the plat that they're dry lot, but we digress. I mean, I struggle with it. I understand there's a problem that needs to be addressed. But I just think that's too big of a net to expect. I mean, I'd like to hear Mr. Camps's position.
I think you're,
Sir, could you wait?
sure.
Emily wants to say something first.
Emily Petrick with ADWR. I just wanted to clarify, Jamie, your question, your original question. Was it concerning lots that are already within subdivisions and a concern that those would now be required to obtain a public report once those lots are sold?
Once the subsequent owner from the original developer, a subsequent owner owns those lots under this principle, yes. As soon as I own 7 lots in 7 different subdivisions in the same section, I have to go get a public report. It may not be what you intended, but that's what these words require.
So I think that probably Jim can speak to this, but this specific provision would not apply to subsequent ownership within a subdivision. This is specific to lots that are not already part of a subdivision plat. And that would be, a new subdivision that would be created under common ownership. And I think maybe, Jim, you had mentioned the exemption for subsequent ownership. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, and we do recognize subsequent ownership when there is already a public report on a previously subdivided property. And we've talked about this with Ms. Kelly regarding the exemption, and we've talked about it as well with Spencer Camps, Home Builders. Then with Mr. Camps, we've made the guarantee that we would certainly look at codifying what current practice is within the department to make sure that these subsequent ownership is established and recognized regardless of who.
Sorry, Spencer, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's fine. The concern you're bringing up is valid. I raised it in the subcommittee as the Department of Real Estate has noted. We've been concerned about this exact issue. We've had custom home builders caught within the 10-year time frame of buying over 6 lots in a already subdivided development that's already met its assured water supply standard, then now needing needing a public report. And there needs to be clarification in the law that people aren't caught in this situation, in our opinion. We get kind of disconnected in this conversation between a public report and then the assured water supply standard. We obviously know those are connected, but a public report doesn't necessarily always mean you need to go get a certificate. It's just a disclosure document for buyers. And so we can work through those issues, in my opinion, and make it clear that if you are in a section of land and you just happen to buy 7 lots over a period of 10 years in already subdivided property, that this should not apply.
Well, Spencer, do I understand that there are already folks getting caught in that conundrum regardless of this new recommendation?
We've had builders caught in this situation now, as the department has discussed. You can get a subsequent public report, but the position of my association is we don't necessarily even need to do that, but there is a carve out already that exists. But a further clarification on that and how we handle those kind of situations, I think, would be valuable.
So moving this recommendation forward potentially gives opportunity to include that type of a discussion for that issue as well.
Correct.
All right, thanks. Other questions of council members? Any council members online with questions? I'm not hearing anyone online, not seeing anyone in the room. I do want to move then to looking for council members' views on moving this recommendation forward. Would anybody like to speak to that? Jamie.
I will support moving it forward to the next level of discussion, be it a stakeholder process. I don't know what it is. I think number 1, and I think number 4 needs to be looked at. Counties already collect ownership information, so I don't think that's really what you're looking for. You want the counties to investigate who is invested in the entity that is the owner, and I don't think that's an appropriate county function. I mean, if you want to know that, make it part of the DRE process. Again, I think the real answer is to look at the enabling legislation for counties, but I would support this going forward to the next process, given that we will have the opportunity to discuss subdivision laws, because I agree with Mr. Camps. Once it's already completed, all of the improvements are in, and it's a consumer protection document. I'm not sure the need's there. And I think we need to look at number 4 as to what is appropriate for the county to do.
Okay, and I do have an email from Sharon Migdal, who couldn't join today, so I'll read her comment. It says, I am in support of the Assured Water Supply Committee's recommendations regarding Wildcat development. I appreciate the work that went into their development. Other council members? Senator Sundaration online, and I see Chairman sorry.
Can I start?
Greg's hand up, not Chairman Miguel's. Senator Sundaration.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll chime in again to support moving this recommendation forward to the legislative and stakeholder process. I want to reiterate my comments from committee for the broader council and public's benefit, that I think this is a good start to be able to strengthen the enforcement of the law, in particular to as it relates to illegal lot splitting. These tools, as has been described over our committee process, have been very, difficult for the department to enforce. And so I think the proposal laid out allows for that to move forward in a smoother fashion. I do also want to note that it's a good start because it does not at all address the broader issue, which is that there can continue to be housing within AMAs. So people who think that they're purchasing housing and living within a very strongly regulated an area with strongly regulated water supply, but without addressing the final piece, which is the number of lots subject to the subdivision and therefore assured water supply requirement, we continue the ability for there to be houses that find themselves, houses within an AMA, find themselves without water. And so I think, you know, as was laid out at the outset, part of this comes from, or comes to the fore because of the notoriety that Arizona gained in the national conversation because of the Rio Verde foothills issue. And I think we'll continue to see that be highlighted if we don't also look into the broader fix of ensuring that all housing within AMAs are subject to assured water supply. But for the purposes of today, I support the recommendation moving forward.
Thank you, Senator. Craig.
Thank you, Director. Craig Sullivan with the County Supervisors Association. I did not serve on this committee that put this item together, but I do want to extend my appreciation to the members who did serve on it. It's a very real issue in the regulated areas, and I just want to acknowledge their hard work on it. I also want to extend my appreciation to Ben and Jim at ADRE for their collaboration with us and receiving our feedback. We do have concerns about this proposal as it's being presented. A lot of that is because of the ambiguity in the language, which we understand as part of the process. Items 1 through 3 to us are fairly transparent in some of their merits, and obviously we'll have to work out some details. The issue that was of most concern when I worked with the county technical professionals was item 4, as it relates to this expanded authority. There are some real concerns about that, what that would look like. And we had asked for statutory language to help us process map that and better understand it. But we understand we're not there at the process. I just want to put on the record that we do have concerns with that element, but we're happy to participate in stakeholder meetings going forward. I did provide some comments to Ben and Jim that are a bit of a roadmap on some of the items we'd have concerns with that we can work through. But just in sum, for the committee members, we'd really want to make sure that we are properly aligning roles between DRE and the counties, and that's clear and appropriate. Operational feasibility is really at the root of some of our issues as well. And then, of course, the resource piece. So those 3 items are issues that we're happy to work on going forward. And again, I want to extend my appreciation to the team that partnered with us to talk through some of our concerns prior to the meeting. Thank you, Director.
Thanks, Craig. Anyone else in the room? Representative Travers.
Thank you. I want to echo everybody's sentiments to say thank you for all the work that everybody on this subcommittee has done. And I personally don't feel that it goes far enough, but I understand that, you know, we need to start making steps forward. As a legislator, I want to be very thoughtful. And when I go into a piece of legislation or when I think about whether I'm going to vote for it or not, I think to myself, you know, is this something that's going to impact the whole state and not just one little part of Maricopa County or something? And so I don't want to continue to be at the legislature and continue to vote for little tiny pieces of legislation that provide water for different cities or different developments. And I was just saying to one of my fellow colleagues that I'm naive enough to think that people are always going to speak to their better angels. And I have subsequently learned that they don't. So if there are opportunities to continue to exploit loopholes, they will. So I think this is a great first step and it's worth a further conversation. So thank you to everybody who's come to the table. And it's all about, you know, not getting everything you want, but getting something that you want and compromising. And so thank you to everybody here.
Thank you. Ron?
Thank you, Director. Ron Doba from NAMWA. And I also want to express my appreciation to the group that worked on this proposal, recognizing that kind of the driving force was Rio Verde. We know that in the Prescott AMA as well, we have some serious issues with the wildcat development that's taken place The proliferation of exempt wells that result from that wildcat development and the impact that it's had on the water providers who do need to meet assured water supply requirements when it comes to siting their wells. So our hopes are that as this goes through the process, eventually we'll see better controls on wildcat developments in that area, and we do support that.
Thank you, Ron. I think there might be some folks online. You can unmute yourself.
Director, this is Daniel Schwiebert, alternate for Representative Gail Griffin, who unfortunately was not able to be here today online. Representative Griffin does appreciate, I'll reiterate some comments on her behalf that were made at the last meeting of the Assured Water Supply Committee. She does appreciate very much that each member of the Governor's Water Policy Council would respect lawful lot splits and the right for an individual to choose to homestead, to live in the area or part of the state of their desire, whether it's for cost and affordability reasons or otherwise, and to respect that not all decisions regarding where one lives might be related to, actively seeking a consumer protection in an active management area, but other factors that are of importance that would lead one to seek a lot split in an unincorporated part of the state, whether in an active management area or otherwise. So she does appreciate that on everyone's part. With respect to the specific proposals and recommendations, she does have some concerns, but does not believe that they are insurmountable. She believes, of course, that whether it's the county or the Department of Real Estate does need to have the smallest area of land necessary to evaluate whether lot splits are contiguous, whether that's a section or a quarter section or a quarter section or otherwise. She also expressed need for maybe some additional clarity on street or roads, whether streets or roads are public or private land or roads. And she also had expressed in some written comments need to not adopt any new or additional rules or requirements that would increase the regulatory burden on lawful lot splits, especially if those additional rules or regulations would be or could be viewed as unlawful prior restraint or a regulatory taking that would take private property rights or an individual's reasonable investor-backed expectations. She did submit comments to these effects, written comments on November 27th, and requested that they be included in the record. But she has opened some bill folders, and in fact, I believe some of her legislative proposals have already dropped and are available for the public to see and to evaluate for additional stakeholder discussion. So I think she looks forward to all members and stakeholders' support as we work through the next steps of this process. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. And as we have said many times, we'll make sure that all of the comments, those that have been expressed verbally and those that come in writing, get posted for the record as part of DWR's website that's tracking all of the council and committee actions.
Tom?
Representative Travers.
Yeah, this is to everyone and Mr. Schwiebert. I look forward to reading the Wildcat subdivision bill that she's already dropped, as well as the other 11 on water that have been submitted as of now.
Thanks. I saw a box light up. I'm not sure whose it was online.
It was me, Tom, Don Pongres, for Governor Lewis. He apologizes, of course, for his inability to be here in person. He's on a plane flying back to Arizona. But he had several comments he wanted me to make, in particular on this one. Having participated in the process throughout, he wanted to commend the group for the transparency and collegiality of the discussions that took place, despite the fact that there were differences expressed by various parties, and to commend the group for the great work that they've done to bring this proposal forward, and that he supports it going to the next stage, knowing that there'll be additional discussions, and he looks forward to participating in the groups as it goes.
Don,
So just here.
John Kamik.
Thank you, Director Bajowski, John Kamik, City of Tucson. As a member of this committee, just want to reiterate the words that we've heard from others, thanking the people participating in this group and this discussion, and we too support from the City of Tucson leaning forward and taking this to the next step. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Brenda first, and then Chris.
I just want to register CAP support for moving this proposal forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Director. Just quickly want to say we also support moving the proposal forward. We recognize that this is an issue, and while I wasn't on the committee, certainly can see a lot of work has been done, especially from a technical perspective. And we also recognize that there is more to do, but we're supportive of moving it forward to the next stage.
Thanks, Chris. Kathy?
Well, I have to say I support this, and but I will say this: I think what we hear is the tug and pull between those who think it does too much and those who don't think it does enough. And so that's the fine balance that we have to strike if we're going to get anything through the legislature. And I think what we are hearing is that everybody wants to deal with something, but they need more concrete information about exactly what they're dealing with. So until we see the legislation, we're all going to be going, sounds good, but let's look at the fine print. But thank you. And I echo everybody else's support for the hard work of the department, the governor's office, the Department of Real Estate. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Kathy. Leslie?
Thanks, Tom. I just want to say the same, that appreciate all the hard work, and SRP supports moving this forward.
Thanks. Joe?
Certainly, we also support the immense effort that went to put this proposal together, knowing that there's going to have to be an iterative set of changes to these recommendations, updates. But as many people have said, it's a good first start, and I think we move forward from here.
Thanks. Paul?
Paul Berglund, alternate for Warren Tenney AMWA. To echo what everyone else has said, we support this proposal moving forward, and we're certainly grateful that the efforts of the Department of Real Estate and the Department of Water Resources and everyone else who's been involved in this issue. This proposal may not entirely eliminate the prospect of another Rio Verde foothills, and yes, it probably does need more fine tuning, but anything and everything that reduces and the prospect of another Rio Verde foothills happening is a worthwhile effort, and we support this moving forward. Kudos.
Thank you. Anyone else? Cynthia?
So this issue of wildcat development is a little bit complicated, and I think the DWR should be commended for its very good faith effort to try to address the specific issues that Department of Real Estate brought to it as to why it cannot enforce its current statutes. I think this proposal represents a very good faith attempt to address those specific issues that DRE brought up. And I'm hopeful that DRE will act accordingly if there's legislation passed to enforce their current statutes. With that, I'll say we support this proposal moving forward.
Thanks. Haley?
Yep, just wanted to voice our support and, recognizing that one bad headline affects all of Arizona, and it's important that we take on this issue. So Audubon is supportive of this.
Thank you. Clark?
We're also supportive of moving it forward. Ben, I wanted to thank you for acknowledging sort of the operational issues that may exist with item 4 and just a willingness to work through that with various stakeholders. So wherever we can be helpful, we will be. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Director Bashotski, this is Robin from State Land.
Yes, Robin.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to say that we're supportive of this moving forward into the next phase. We look forward to continuing to provide input and be engaged as it moves forward. And while we haven't encountered a scenario like this in recent times for state land, we, any recommendations that are implemented in the future, we'll be sure to make sure, we capture those requirements in our real estate division standard work. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra.
Thanks, Director. I also want to express our support for this recommendation. With the work that we do at economic development, it's very important that we have a water policy that we can continue to communicate to advance our economic development efforts. So I really do appreciate all of the work that's gone into this. I think what I've heard around the table is there is a need to look at the language to ensure that the policy we're discussing today is exactly the way it will be implemented and executed. So I'm interested in seeing the final language. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Either in the room or
Director?
online.
This is
Yes.
This is Chairwoman Amelia Flores. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Chairwoman. Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak regarding the proposed changes and recommendations, and looking forward to moving it to the next level. And thank you for all of you who burned the midnight oil to get this accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Anyone else?
Director?
Yes.
This is Doug Dunham, EPCOR. Also wish to express our appreciation to all the work that went into this. EPCOR does support moving this forward, working out the details as we move through the legislative process. And am happy to report that the Corporation Commission is hearing our application on the standpipe operation for at least the Rio Verde Foothills case may be going away. So we look forward to finalizing that process as well.
Thanks, Doug. Anyone else? We're getting to the end here.
Director Buchowski,
Yes.
Bita Becker with the Navajo Nation, just echoing the nation's support and congratulating you all on the hard work that's gone into this proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Bita. So I guess I'll summarize here. So understanding that there needs to still be some discussion of some of these bullets on this recommendation, and moving forward with a stakeholder process to further flesh out the details, including legislative language. I am hearing very strong support among council members to move this recommendation forward to the governor. And I thank all of you for your comments and for all the work that's been done. And so that will move forward to the governor, and we can move on then to the next set of issues related to next steps in terms of the assured water supply recommendations. Carol.
Thank you, Director. I'll try to move through this quickly. We do not have any additional Assured Water Supply Committee meetings scheduled for this year. We want to maintain the momentum of the committee, of course. It's done great work so far. And I think we will maintain that momentum as committee members will have a lot of work to do in the ADOS stakeholder process and in the legislative process to move the Wildcat and build to rent recommendations forward. And we need to allow the necessary room to do this. I wanted to take a moment to clarify the rulemaking process that ADWR will be leading for the ADOS proposal. ADWR staff have begun drafting rules to implement the ADOS proposal. Our goal is to have an initial draft of the rules for review in January. Staff have scheduled a series of initial individual small group meetings with key stakeholders to solicit additional input, particularly from those who may be able to utilize this pathway, to ensure that we understand their circumstances, their concerns, and their insights. Those meetings began last week and will continue through the end of this year. Additional individual meetings and possibly larger group meetings will be scheduled as needed as the rule drafting proceeds. Staff at ADWR and CAGRD are at the same time working to analyze the groundwater allowance, the portion of new supplies to offset unreplenished use, and GRD reporting requirements, and how those will impact ADOS applicants and groundwater supplies. We recognize the need for the rulemaking to proceed as quickly as possible, and we are working accordingly. Our plan is to have a thorough, informal stakeholder process to ensure the rules are buttoned up before we go to the formal rulemaking, to ensure that it is completed as smoothly and as rapidly as possible, hopefully without objections. The formal rulemaking process is a defined process. It is going to require at least 6 months, probably 6 to 8 months to complete, unless we have a bill passed that enables expedited rulemaking. And even if that's the case, it won't shorten it by all that much, I don't think. Our hope is that we can complete this process by the end of the summer. As we see how our work proceeds, we will update you regarding future Assured Water Supply Committee meetings. Rest assured, they will come. We have much work ahead of us, beginning with defining our next priorities from the list of concepts that the committee has compiled. And I just want to thank the committee and everybody who has been involved in this process. We've come a long way in a very brief period of time, and it has been a pleasure to work with you all. I will hand it back to the director.
Thanks, Carol. So hope springs eternal. Maybe we can have ADOS legislation with emergency clause and we won't need rulemaking. Moving forward to rural groundwater. So looking at the time it took to get through one issue on assured water supply, knowing we have 2 issues on rural groundwater, I won't go through a long introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to go through the background and ask Bruce to do that as rapidly as possible. I want to get to the actual recommendations and those questions and discussions. Again, we will recognize upfront that more work needs to be done, fleshing out details, and eventually coming up with legislation on these proposals. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bruce.
Thank you, Director Poshatsky. Again, my name is Bruce Allen. I'm the advisor for the director. Next slide, please. These first few slides are background information. Most of you have seen these slides. I think what's most important about this slide is that it reveals the diversity associated with the geography of Arizona and where we have issues in these various groundwater basins associated with aquifer depletion. Those areas in red are areas that have experienced aquifer depletion, and those crosshatched are also fall into that same category. Next slide, please. Here was the objective of the team and the rural groundwater management team, but by December 2023, actionable recommendations to the governor that provide a framework that assists rural communities in managing, protecting, and sustainably managing those aquifers. And these recommendations are for rural communities outside the AMAs and INAs in managing the local resources. And the recommendations should be broad enough. And if you recall that previous map that we looked at, because of the diversity, they need to be broad enough and customizable to be tailored to a basin's unique characteristics, whether those are physical or socioeconomic characteristics. Next slide. The committee process, and what was the process that we had gone through? We developed a framework up front to use as a starting point. And essentially that framework took pieces from groundwater management activities and other proposals that have been worked on over the last 10 years. And so we took pieces of that material, submitted it to the Rural Groundwater Committee members, asked them to review the framework, asked them to reach out to their constituencies at each meeting. We asked them to do that, and then to provide feedback before each meeting. The feedback at the meeting was also, not only was it verbal feedback, but we were also looking for written feedback. We then provided that feedback for the committee members at the following meeting and reviewed that feedback. During the ongoing discussions with the Rural Groundwater Committee, DWR also engaged with committee members in a parallel process outside of the committee meetings, in which we had 9 committee meetings. Next slide, please. Here's a very, very quick, brief recap, but of the 9 meetings, as I mentioned, we had up front, we put a starting proposal together. Next slide. And we took that starting proposal and that background information, and then from essentially August 17th through November 16th, we worked on developing wording and consensus statements and building the rural groundwater management framework proposal and the measuring and metering proposal that we're going to be discussing today. Next slide. So 2 proposals for council consideration today. or the Rural Groundwater Management Framework and Measuring and Reporting. The committee has done its part to develop these high-level proposals. The committee recognizes that additional work will be needed to complete these proposals in the legislative process, and the committee recognizes the remaining development will occur much outside of this council process, but will require expanded involvement and input from others. And as I go through the Rural Groundwater Management Framework, I'd like to ask also the committee members, since much of this is your wording, as I go through the wording, if there are clarifying questions or points that you would like to raise, I'd like you each to speak up. If we could, next slide. We broke up the Rural Groundwater Management Framework into these areas, or these key component areas. Essentially, within each of these key component areas, we developed consensus statements. The recommendation that we're going to be asking the council approve are these consensus statements that we'll go through, and I'll go through that wording, but the consensus statements that essentially make up the framework. So I don't want to be, I don't want, especially those of you that weren't on the Rural Groundwater Committee, I don't want you to be confused about what you're going to be approving, but essentially what we're going to ask you to approve moving forward are these consensus statements, but the consensus statements make up the framework of the Rural Groundwater Management Plan. Next slide, please. There was also a request on, the sequencing. When you establish or create one of these Rural Groundwater Management Framework, what would that process look like? And as you'll see, this process also includes much of that framework and those key concepts that we talked about. But first there's a process for designating the Rural Groundwater Management Area, and we'll talk about that. And then acknowledgement of existing uses. Acknowledgement of existing uses was an item that was brought up by committee members. In other words, acknowledge those existing historic uses and users within the Rural Groundwater Management Area. From that perspective, we would develop essentially a council and the membership associated with that council of very importance with the committee was that we needed local input because of the unique characteristics associated with these groundwater basins that cover that are across the state. There's a need for council input. There's a need for local input, and in partnership with DWR in building the next step, which are area goals, and ultimately a management plan that would support those goals. So this is kind of the sequencing steps that would be necessary in order to create one of these rural groundwater management areas. Next slide. So what I'd like to do is concentrate more on these consensus statements and the wording that the council came up with. Designation of the rural groundwater management area. The committee consensus statement was ADWR would have some initiation criteria in creating one of these rural groundwater management areas. The director has the option to initiate a rural groundwater management area designation process. The criteria to initiate should not be more onerous than an AMA. So essentially not more burdensome than the requirements associated with creating AMAs. They should be created when there has been a significant decrease in groundwater indicators over time and access to groundwater supplies is being threatened. So when we talk about indicators, we're thinking in terms of aquifer depletion, we're thinking in terms of maybe decrease in water quality, or there could even be issues such as subsidence. There would also be a local initiation process, a process that can be initiated by the County Board of Supervisors through a resolution or a petition by a certain percentage of area registered voters. Now, as you can see, as I start going through these statements, these consensus statements, there's still quite a bit of detail that's going to have to be worked through and worked out through this legislative process. But these are the statements that the committee agreed to. There would also be a hearing and designation process where ADWR is to conduct a hearing process similar to establishing an AMA or an INA, and prior to a decision on the designation, and the director would have final designation authority. Next slide. There would also be an interim pause, and this is something that the committee talked about. If you're establishing one of these rural groundwater management areas, we wanted to prevent someone from going out and maybe drilling a group of non-exempt wells for the purpose of potentially developing some other project or some other uses. So the thought was a pause and a need for a pause on groundwater use expansion that begins when the rural groundwater management area is designated. And that pause would continue until the area management plan is approved by the department. So the thought is no new non-exempt wells within area boundaries, with exceptions for supplies necessary for the protection of human health. But some of the other exceptions that ultimately would have to be described as part of legislation, we talked about well replacement. Someone's well may collapse, so you may need to replace your well. There also may be regulatory issues such as Safe Drinking Water Act violations where you may have to replace a well or do some other things associated with meeting those regulations. And then we also, something else that was brought up, there may be ongoing development, large development plans that have been in place before the designation, and those development plans, and as those developments move forward, they may have the need to drill additional wells associated with those developments. So those are all items that are going to have to be addressed through this legislative process when it comes to exceptions in this interim pause, but we very much want to avoid a major groundwater use expansion. Next slide. Acknowledgement of existing uses. This was something that was brought up by the committee members on this acknowledgement. We talked about, do you call these acknowledgements? Do you call it a registry, or do we call it a certificate? And I think the group came up with, we thought acknowledgement was probably the best term to not confuse it with other programs. But the committee consensus statement is there is a need to document current and historical groundwater uses and users. If a rural groundwater management area is designated, it would apply to all sectors and water use types served by non-exempt wells or those wells that are pumping more than 35 gallons per minute. You would need sufficient information to make an acknowledgement determination. Sufficient information, we went round and round, but just to give you an idea of what we were talking about, you'd have to potentially have a quantifiable use associated with a well. The location of that use, potentially the type of use, and then of course you'd have to have a registered well in place. But there was a variety of things that we talked about that ultimately will have to be worked out in some form of legislation. The process to establish an acknowledgement should be more streamlined than the AMA application process. These acknowledgements would be subject to conservation or efficiency measures. And that was something that all the committee members agreed to, that once you do have an acknowledgement, that acknowledgement, then you'd be subject to these conservation or efficiency measures that are really focused on achieving the management plan and the goals associated with that management plan. And you need to provide flexibility for water users in the local economy while achieving these goals. So you could, flexibility, we talked about exchanges, maybe credit building, recharge and reuse activities potentially for these end users, all in the support, of course, the area goal. Next slide, please. We talked about this council and the selection of this council and what would be the duties of the council. So the committee consensus statement was to make required duties would be to make a complete record of proceedings that are open to public review, respectfully cooperate with federally recognized Indian tribes, cities, towns, counties, water providers. And for those of you in the room, water providers, the committee recognized that the definition of a water provider would also include private water companies, ditch companies, and irrigation districts, and then other local, state, or federal agencies or organizations within the area to engage in regional planning, coordinate with DWR in creating these area goals and the management plan that address the needs of the local basin. Of course, they could request technical assistance from the department, and then recommend and send to the director the area goals and management plan. So ADWR would issue approval of the goals and the portion of the management plan to be implemented by DWR, and then striking through anything that may be illegal, unconstitutional, and ensuring if there are several other rural groundwater management areas in place, that there's consistency in many of these management in these goals and in some of these management plans. Next slide, please. Optional council duties included the committee could gather additional information and data. We talked about a wide variety of items that they may be able to collect, potentially establishing a steering committee or an advisory committee. And really that's to ensure that the committee would have the opportunity to bring in other interested parties regarding the development operation of the area management plan to get additional advice from residents. And then the council may have even other duties. And some of the duties that we talked about was potentially, could the council hire a consultant? And so that was another consensus statement that the committee came to an agreement on when it came to the council duties. Next slide, please. And then when it came to the rural groundwater management area goals, committee consensus statement was each rural groundwater management area must have at least one goal, with all goals tied to the needs and conditions of the local area. The goals must address the groundwater conditions and criteria identified by DWR when the area was designated a rural groundwater management area. The goals also should remain in place and should remain the same throughout the duration of the rural groundwater management area. No one was interested in seeing those goals changing over time. And as you all know, it takes quite some time in order to get some of these programs and management plans in place. And as you're monitoring conditions to see benefits potentially to the aquifer, the council must draft and recommend goals in consultation with the Department of Water Resources. The council should respectfully cooperate with federally recognized tribes, cities, towns, counties, water providers, and other local, state, or federal agencies or organizations within the area when drafting these goals. And then the director issues final approval of the goals. But something that was very important was that you allow these local water users in the council to work with ADWR in establishing the goal. Area management plan, the committee consensus statement was the area management plan shall include one or more management goals for the area approved by the director, a description of the appropriate physical and socioeconomic conditions in the area and how the goals relate to those conditions. So that's kind of providing the basis before you start building that management plan. Summary and consideration of other relevant government management plans. And we talked about county plans, city plans that are in place in the area. Methods to monitor and report on progress. So we're going to have to have potentially monitoring wells, other indexing wells in place to monitor progress when it comes to improvements associated with the aquifer. If aquifer depletion is the primary goal that these areas are focused on. Secondly, measuring and annual reporting will be required for non-exempt wells in the area. There will be rules governing well location. And there will also be mandatory water conservation programs for all sectors. So the committee agreed that there was a need to take into consideration for those that have also been working on conservation programs, and that has to also be considered because there are many users within these basins that are very conservation oriented and have been taking conservation very, very seriously. So those types of programs also have to be considered. Next slide, please. Committee consensus statement, the area management plan may include other water management practices or programs within ADWR's statutory authority. We're not looking at new statutory authority, but existing statutory authorities that are deemed appropriate by the council for achieving the goals with approval by and coordination with the department or other entities as necessary. And then the council can recommend, but not mandate, supplemental water conservation and management actions for implementation by cities, towns, counties, water providers, and other public agencies. So for example, potentially the area management plan could include maybe an ask for low plumbing fixtures. And then a city potentially could mandate that, but the recommendation from the council would be just that, a recommendation that you potentially put in low flow fixtures. Next slide, please. Committee consensus statement on council membership. And we had a lot of discussion on council membership and what this council looks like. But we came to this consensus statement that the council shall consist of no fewer than 5 and no more than 9 members. This is something that ultimately is going to have to be negotiated through as you develop more specifics. No more than 1 member may reside outside the area boundaries. Membership should represent all major water use sectors within the area, such as ag, industrial, and municipal users. And the council must include some number of at-large members to meet the specific needs of the local economy, population, and water users of the relevant sectors. Next slide, please. Also, in regard to council membership, the committee consensus statement was on the appointment process. Members must be appointed. We had a lot of discussion on who makes those appointments, including the governor and others. Didn't come to any consensus, but everyone did agree that the members must be appointed. The members shall be appointed from a list of recommended individuals submitted by federally recognized Indian tribes, cities, towns, counties, and water providers and state legislators within the area boundaries of the rural groundwater management area, appointed based on knowledge of interest in and experience with water and water issues. And then the members would serve 5-year terms with member terms staggered. This was another element that was brought up in the committee, that the need for potentially a sunset and a review period, if the objective or the goal is met. So the committee agreed with this consensus statement that every 10 years after the designation, the director shall review whether the conditions for designating the rural groundwater management area still exists. And then if the director determines that the area goals have been achieved, the director may rescind the rural groundwater management area designation after following the same notice and hearing procedures that were used for the initial designation process. And then lastly, unless the rural groundwater management area is rescinded by the director, the council shall review and either recommend to readopt the existing management plan for an additional term of 10 years or draft and recommend a new management plan. We went round and round. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? And there were even some thoughts that once this rural groundwater management area was corrected, that it isn't rescinded, but we came to this consensus statement by the committee. Next slide, please. Well, before I make this recommendation, well, I guess I'll make the recommendation then, Tom. I think you can make the call out to other committee members if they have any comments or suggestions.
Bruce, I'll just take it over so everyone can see the council recommendation on the screen. I will remind folks that the details attached to this recommendation are the consensus statements of each element of the framework that Bruce just went through. Again, that document is in front of you at your seat for your ability to refer back to those specific elements and those consensus statements that attach to those elements. So before we get into taking comments in support or otherwise of the recommendation, I'll first ask members of the council in person or online if they have any clarifying questions on any of the council, the consensus statements on the elements. Sandy.
Just a real quick question on the opening statement. It makes a recommendation that this framework be submitted. In the Wildcat subdivision, it said for legislation. Is that just an omission here, or is this going to be, this needs to be legislation? And I'm just,
So yeah,
just a clarification in that statement would be helpful.
we agree, Sandy, that this recommendation to implement it, we would need to have legislation. And we will work through that, the details, et cetera, et cetera. Other questions? Paul?
Just to clarify our question on the appointment process of the council membership on page 4, 2B, it has a specific list of where members shall be appointed from, or where the list should come from, I guess I should say. And I'm just curious whether we need to limit it to that list, or whether lists of possible individuals can be submitted by other organizations, for example, stakeholder organizations.
So Paul, this, I believe, was carefully debated through the committee in terms of kind of the balancing of who could appoint But certainly a conversation about expanding who might submit lists can be had as we delve through the details and develop legislation.
Thank you. I didn't remember that particular point being brought up.
Any other questions? Anyone online who have questions? Spencer?
I know this is not the same proposal that we've seen legislatively in the past, but in previous drafts, there was authorizing language for cities to regulate water in kind of a new way, both inside and outside the AMAs. And I just wanted to clarify on this proposal, any new authority for cities to regulate water that was outlined in the presentation, would that be just limited to non-AMA areas, or is it include AMA areas like we've seen in the past?
So this new framework and proposal is not intended to attach to existing active management areas. In relation to cities having authority, I think this process is councils can make recommendations to cities. Cities can potentially make recommendations as the management plan is developed. But this is not intended to give cities new authorities to regulate if they don't already have. Other questions? Ed.
Director. First off, it's an honor to be here and work with you folks. And I think I'm probably the only actual farmer / water user to come to this board, and I'm honored to be so. Giving some of my experience of watching water as a young man, I attended Lubbock Christian College in Lubbock, Texas, and farmed in the Ogallala area, and was very familiar with that water reducing. Came back to Arizona, where I was born and raised on a farm, and went back to farming here in Cochise County. And again, my father was involved many years ago in developing INA in the Douglas area. Understanding that, then I've also farmed in Mexico, both the West Coast and the Sonoran River valleys. Personally, financing it myself, understanding the actual liabilities of how important water is. In the Mexican coast, the West Coast, there's a series of lakes, as most of us know, that was thought out well by the forefathers some 100 years ago, and now the city of Hermosillo and many other areas receive their water from this foresight. Along the Sonoran River, the same goes in to feed those rivers. I say all that to say that I have watched our water decrease. I do pepper breeding and I work in genetics, and I reach in the black box of the genetic hole, often trying to develop new peppers for you folks to enjoy. Some hot, some not. And but my idea is that in the future, the sunset review clause is very, very important, because we might be able to obtain new technology, just as the Mexicans did 100 years ago through dams. And that seemed very simple. But what's to say that we don't discover other systems, whether it be geothermal, whether it be offshore desalinization? There's many, many ways it could be. So I'm very thankful for this sunset clause, not that we reverse. One of my constituents sent me an email and asked, be careful with the sunset clause that it doesn't run backwards on this, and I respect that. At the same time, that sunset clause is very, very important. For myself, part of the reason I was so honored to be able to sit on this is if our area was put into a AMA under a 5-year historical base, I have been very progressive in seeking crops that use very small amounts of water, i.e. some cactus product, rosemary, those kind of things. I, in effect, have on my 2,000 acres have done what I'm going to plead that this work out to be, and that is that I took areas that I used very little water on and moved that water to grow my seed blocks, my genetic blocks of chili that use more water in smaller areas and be able to move that around on the farm. Ideally, we could come up with a save, bank, or conserve water. The next thing I would want, or I would request, is clearly that we're able to designate a given water right, whether it's so much water feet per acre on given, and how is that distinguished? How many acres is decided? But under the present AMA, I would lose much of my water rights because my 5-year history on some of this is as low as 4 inches. I thought I was going to save our part of the valley on water doing this, but then we had some other entities move in and drill new wells. And so there's a lot of aspects to this thing that could be very helpful for myself personally. I was very fearful of an AMA because of losing my water rights. Under this, if we can establish some given water quantities that are tied, Emily, to the land, to our land. So it's ours. We don't want to lose land rights. We were very strong on that. At the same time, spending hours with Patrick and some with Bruce, I'm very comfortable as a whole with this program. How we establish those water rights, how we view water recharge, whether it's in the mountains and some kind of reserve aquifers that fill up. I personally know of several that are working quite well in our area. But the main point is somewhere, if we're not somewhat aggressive in controlling the water pumping, my great-great-grandchildren will not have an opportunity to farm. March 23rd, 1775, Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Today we sit here because he was brave enough to do that. Are we brave enough to be aggressive enough to move forward with something that probably, to your point, Kathleen, it won't fit everybody, but it will fit the whole of the need? Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Ed. And we are at a crossroads, in my opinion, of needing to do something, and I really appreciated your comments, including the fact that AMAs probably don't work everywhere. And that's what this whole new framework is about, having a different type of tool that can be tailored more to the specific conditions locally, rather than more of the AMA kind of one-fits-all process. So other clarifying questions before we get into the comments of support or otherwise? Anyone online?
Director,
Yes.
this is Doug Dunham, EPCOR. I might have missed it, but how would the mandatory water adequacy statutes that are currently in place or areas that have adopted it, how would that fit in with this proposed framework?
Hi, Doug. This is Emily. This framework, the framework as it stands does not include any assured water supply requirements. So I think the water adequacy requirements would remain the same. If there were a mandatory adequacy jurisdiction, those requirements would be in place. And then outside of that, the same water adequacy standards that apply outside of AMAs would continue to apply.
So it wouldn't be an automatic overlay for the mandatory water adequacy.
Correct. That it does not change the existing requirements for water adequacy or the existing jurisdictions for mandatory water adequacy.
Okay, but those jurisdictions, if they chose to try to adopt, they could still do that under this framework.
Yes, that would still be available to those jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll talk about the recommendation itself and seek people's views on that. Paul?
Thank you, Director. Paul Brierly, Director of the Department of Agriculture. I prepared a few comments. This is really a pivotal moment for Arizona and for Arizona agriculture. Rural residents and generational farms, wells are going dry in some areas. I'm thrilled to be serving as Director of Department of Agriculture, not because it's easy right now, but because it's impactful. The legacy I'd like to leave is an Arizona agriculture that remains productive, remains profitable, even in the face of less water. And I think we can do that with the help of our farmers, our universities, our innovative companies, and I know we can get that done. I suspect every one of us around the table acknowledges that there's less water. It's a finite resource in the desert. Some of our groundwater basins are in trouble, and I think we all acknowledge that's the case. Governor Hobbs, to her credit, isn't willing to stick her head in the sand and hope the problem goes away. She said no to urban development on groundwater that's not available, and she said no to a dead-end race to the bottom for rural Arizona and agriculture. This is not without controversy, but I think it's what needs to happen. Our generational farms, as Ed just eloquently said, they need to know that they'll be around for the next generation and the one after that and the one after that. That starts with making sure they'll have water and not just a bunch of dry wells. This council also has not been without controversy. We come from many areas of the state. We represent different stakeholders. 15 of us represent rural stakeholders. I appreciate that the governor's goal is not to shut down any one sector, including agriculture. This is not a predetermined outcome. I and others have had our input heard. I think we've moved the needle in creating this rural groundwater management area framework. The following items are particularly important to agriculture, and I appreciate them being incorporated. This framework would apply only to the most threatened groundwater basins, where the impacts are already being felt and groundwater users know that something needs to be done. It'll be more flexible, less onerous, and locally driven than an AMA or an INA. Current and historical water use will be certificated, allowing users to show current use and conservation measures already implemented, again, as Ed stated. Measurement of agricultural water use could be done with satellites or other technology rather than mandatory metering of wells. And to repeat that again, the 10-year sunset review, I think, is really critical because that allows for the possibility of sunsetting if conditions no longer warrant regulation, whether they're hydrologic conditions or technological conditions. So, of course, there's a lot more to do. As this moves forward, there'll be need to be give and take on all sides. This is going to take trust. It's going to take involvement of all parties, and that's something I pledge to help make happen. So for these reasons, I support moving these recommendations forward to the next step, and I thank the committee for their work.
Thanks, Paul. I'm sure there are others, but again, I will take this opportunity to read from an email Councilman member Sharon Migdal sent. It says, as a member of the Rural Groundwater Committee, I wish to express my full support for the committee's recommended Rural Groundwater Management Framework. This recommendation will support the long-term vitality of Arizona's community and businesses, and I look forward to the next steps in this process. So thanks to Sharon. Others who would like to comment? Kathy.
So I would like to say to Ed, thank you. It's really a breath of fresh air to hear an actual farmer saying the things that you said, and I super appreciate it. I'm going to cry, honestly. You kind of moved me to tears. So to the Rural Groundwater Committee, whoa, this is big time. I mean, this is a lot of work, And these are not simple consensus statements. These are pretty complex. So you've got a pretty good framework here. And I get that there's a lot of work yet to be done. And I also get that this is going to require legislation. And oh boy, that's another process in and of itself. But I want to read you something that I received this morning. And I think maybe many of you got this. This is from a resident in the Wilcox Basin. And it was to the full council. And I'm just going to read a couple of points. The council knows that the Wilcox Basin is threatened because agricultural overpumping has caused water levels to drop, land to subside, and earth fissures to open. While the council has been working hard to come up with a framework for rural groundwater regulation, a Canadian lithium mining corporation has been proceeding with plans to drill several wells in the Wilcox Playa. Mining lithium involves extracting brine water and allowing it to evaporate. And Californians are planting thousands and thousands of pecan trees south and west of the Wilcox Playa. A handful of high-dollar investors seem to matter more to Arizona than the citizens living in the Wilcox Basin do. We better take that to heart. We need to take care of the people that are living in these areas, and we cannot continue to ignore the problem that is occurring in many of these groundwater basins. So thanks again to the committee, thanks to DWR always, and for Patrick for whipping everybody into shape and making them work harder than they should. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kathy. Chris?
If you bear with me a minute, I wanted to explain why I'm appreciative that the Agribusiness Water Council is able to serve on this Water Policy Council. Many of you probably are not familiar with our purpose, mission statement, and goals. Our purpose is to maintain the integrity of Arizona's water supplies and the industries that rely on these essentials for the benefit of Arizona's economy. Our mission statement is to represent irrigated agriculture and agribusiness by working to promote, protect water resources in the state of Arizona and to actively educate, support, and promote all aspects of water, agriculture, and agribusiness. Our goals are to alert, educate, link its members on current issues important to water, agribusiness, including but not limited to federal and state legislation that impacts Arizona's water, agriculture and agribusiness, federal and state water, power and land policies and regulations, groundwater management, changes in taxation proposals and policies, rural, state, and regional economic development, achieve a working consensus among the members for the best, most prudent course for agriculture, pursue in conjunction with its position in Arizona's economy, speak with one voice to generate further support within the industry and effectively communicate that support to state and federal entities, etc. We're here to protect rural economies. We're here to protect people like Ed Curry, the newcomers. We want them to come together, find a way to get along, and to make our rural economies and groundwater resilient. And with that, we pursue moving these guidelines or recommendations along.
Thanks, Chris. Sandy?
Thank you, Tom. Sandy Favorites, Freeport. So working through this process and for many years working on these issues, this has always been a tough issue to achieve consensus around and to really thoroughly identify and really get to the heart of what the issues are. And I appreciate the process that we've gone through. I think we've gotten a lot more insight into where different individuals, where different entities, what will work for them. This is a framework. It's not perfect. Right. It's very, there's vagaries in here. There's, a lot of work. There's a lot more work that needs to go into this. But I guess as far as frameworks go, this is much better than anything we've ever come up with before. It's a step in the right direction. Will it solve all the problems? Absolutely not. But it will go a long way to doing that. There are key elements in here that are going to require a lot of discussion. The sunset review issue is a big issue. Our users, we're mine, you like them or not, we are what we are, but we need certainty. We're not opposed to regulation, but we want certainty of what those regulations are going to be. We want to be treated fairly, just like every other water user. And that, I think we've got the framework for that. The other key piece in this that I think is really important is the recognition of existing water uses. And although it's not quite clear in here, Bruce referred to this, is the recognition of existing conservation, existing water management activities that people have employed. The Safford mine sits in the Gila Valley. It's a newer mine. It has achieved a 93% reuse rate. It uses very little water in a valley that's very contentious as far as water use goes. And the recognition of the investment that the company has made, that Freeport has made into all our mines to achieve globally an 89% reuse and efficiency rate across our portfolio, I think is going to be very important as we discuss that piece and as we go forward. So, it's been difficult. And like I said, it's not perfect, but it's a good start. We, Freeport, will support this framework, obviously, moving forward. It's not a just blanket acceptance of what legislation comes, subsequent legislation that will come. We will be hopefully an active participant in that, along with everybody else. As a very diverse group. And to come up with something that we hit on all the right pieces. May not like them, exactly, but we'll get there. And I appreciate the department's time and the governor's office time and everybody on the council for participating in this process. So thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. You mentioned the difficult conversations we've had. One of the strengths of this process is that we've been able to sit face to face mostly in the council and the committee and talk to each other, express our views, express our concerns, talk about how these things might impact us. And I think that's necessary and a great part of this process. Everyone's had a chance to be heard. And so I think the conversations will get even more difficult as we move into creating the legislation. I want to recognize next Daniel Schwabert online. Daniel?
Director, thank you. This is Daniel Schwabert speaking as alternate for Representative Gail Griffin. She has prepared and submitted some written comments on this topic today and asked that I read them for the council. So I'll do that now. Dear members of the Governor's Water Policy Council, on slide 29 of the Arizona Department of Water Resources PowerPoint presentation for the June 29th meeting of the Governor's Water Policy Council Rural Groundwater Committee, and on slides 11 and 27 of the department's August 17 presentation, the department stated that the local groundwater stewardship area proposal that was introduced this legislative session was the, quote, starting point for the Rural Groundwater Committee, and that this framework was, quote, based on LGSA legislation. As stated on slide 29 of the department's June 29th presentation, this LGSA proposal and Rural Groundwater Committee's starting point included the following requirements: mandatory groundwater monitoring, metering, and reporting, limits on new wells, non-expansion of largest users of groundwater, mandatory conservation requirements, and local management goals that are based on, quote, climatic, economic, and ecological conditions. To the extent that the current rural groundwater management framework, as it has currently been proposed, is based on or contains any part or all of these requirements, I cannot support the proposal. And today, in fact, on slide 39 of today's presentation, we saw goals that are tied to the undefined needs and conditions of the area. And we also heard the term socioeconomic stated on slide 40, which, as we've heard from Representative Gail Griffin, can be anything. Slide 40 also lists, that slide 40 of today's presentation also lists mandatory requirements, which are the same or substantially similar to those that were included in the, quote, starting point proposal, which was, quote, based on the LGSA legislation introduced this year. And that includes mandatory metering and monitoring requirements and conservation. Rather, I support Senator Sina Kerr's proposed water basin management plan, including a quantifiable and enforceable water right inherent with land ownership, the ability to save, bank, and conserve groundwater for future use and generations, recognizing the benefits to the aquifer, protections for private property rights in the land and in the groundwater beneath the surface estate, and encouraging water conservation by using best management practices across all industries, including investing in recharge projects, large and small, capturing stormwater runoff, installing xeriscape landscaping, fixing water loss due to waterline leakage, and addressing the prevention of recharge due to the fact that 95% of all precipitation that reaches the surface in Arizona evaporates before it has an opportunity to infiltrate the aquifer. In addition, any goals that are adopted or advanced should include or be explicitly limited by the purpose of government stated in the Arizona Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, which states, and I quote, "All political power is inherent in the people. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, and governments are established to protect and maintain individual rights. A continuation of a strong economy must also be high on the list of goals as well." And in closing, we should ask, in the context of the active management areas, why is the residential for sale single family home the only industry being targeted when affordable housing is in a crisis? Thank you for allowing my comments, and please enter these into the official record. Respectfully, Representative Gail Griffin. Thank you.
Daniel will post those comments. I would just say that maybe setting aside the assured water supply, single residential home issue, just about every issue raised in the comments from Representative Griffin that you read has been discussed in either the committee or the council. And I think we had, again, consensus out of the committee recommendation. Those issues were discussed, they were debated, there was transparency, there was openness and the ability to talk about them. So with that, we'll move on. And I think Senator Sundaration wants to speak next.
Thank you, and I'll keep it short. Just wanted to add my thanks and commend the Rural Groundwater Committee for putting forth a proposal. We know this is direly needed. We're reading news stories locally and nationally featuring people across the state. And we're hearing directly from community members impacted by the declining aquifers. So this is really needed. And so thank you so much to the committee for making these consensus statements. I look forward to seeing more about this. As was mentioned, there's a lot of detail that still needs to be added here. And so want to make sure that we are working in lockstep in the future as it goes through future stakeholder and the legislative process, because we want to make sure that any future iterations, future details continue to hold steadfast to the goal that this recommendation started with, which is to make sure that we are doing something to protect our declining aquifers, to protect our residents. And so I want to make sure that what ultimately does develop and the details as they get fleshed out are extremely protective, especially of our rural residents losing their access to water, so that I can make a recommendation to my caucus to continue to support it going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Olson.
Thank you, Director. Joe Olson, Metro Water District and SAWA. For a framework proposal, this actually has a significant level of effort and level of detail, which shows how much partnership and collaboration has occurred. As such, we support moving this proposal forward.
Thank you. Karen Peters.
Thank you, Tom. Karen Peters, Department of Environmental Quality. I want to express our department's support for this proposal and the clear and present need for groundwater management in rural Arizona. And we approach this issue from a perspective, a unique perspective on the council. Our mission, of course, is to protect public health and the environment in Arizona. And there are many concerns respecting rural groundwater that we have, but I'll just mention two very significant issues. One of which is, as I have said, and I apologize to members of the Rural Groundwater Committee who have heard this before, all aquifers in Arizona are designated by law as drinking water, for drinking water use. There are 1,500 public water systems in Arizona that are regulated by DEQ. Most of those are rural and small. Most of those rely entirely on groundwater for serving their customers. It is imperative that there be a management framework so that those water providers can understand what the context is for the needs of their customers and plan accordingly. We need accurate and complete information about the state of these aquifers. And that relates to the second issue that I'll raise, which is in order for us to protect groundwater quality in rural Arizona or to address existing contamination of groundwater in rural Arizona, it is essential that we have accurate data regarding the state of these aquifers, the state of groundwater pumping that is occurring that affects groundwater cleanup remedies. So with that, I strongly support a framework. And with respect to the second recommendation, I would say we support that very much as well. Thank you.
Paul.
Paul Bergwin, speaking as an alternate for Warren Tenney Amwa. We understand and appreciate that the desire of rural Arizona to have more tools to more effectively manage local groundwater challenges. This committee has certainly been engaged in a lively give and take process to develop this framework. Our cities are obviously not rural, but we do recognize that challenges in one part of the state, those negative headlines, impact all of us elsewhere. And so we see it as advantageous to further develop this proposal. That's all.
Thanks. John Kamik.
Thank you, Director Bashowski. John Kamik, City of Tucson. I too want to voice my support for this framework going forward. I think the work of the Rural Groundwater Committee in putting this together should be commended. It's the devil will be in the details as it moves forward, but I think this is a good first step, and I'm looking forward to see how this turns out. Thank you.
Thanks. Bill Boyd.
Thank you, Director. My name is Bill Boyd. I'm here on behalf of Director Torres, and I have a statement prepared by him. On behalf of Director Torres, who is a member of the Rural Groundwater Committee, I want to express support for the Rural Groundwater Management Area Framework proposal. Healthy watersheds that support the collection and infiltration of surface water to the underlying aquifers, as well as protecting water quality, is important to maintaining future groundwater resources in rural Arizona. Flexible approach to address groundwater issues in the Rural Groundwater Management Area Framework proposal allows local entities to establish area goals that inform a management plan which could include watershed health goals. These goals will allow DFFM and land management agencies to consider these goals in decision-making on where to best invest money and other resources to maintain or improve watershed health and mitigate potential effects from catastrophic wildfire. Director Torres is appreciative of all the efforts provided by Director Bashowski and his staff, as well as the efforts from members of the committee and council for their efforts to address sustainable groundwater in rural Arizona. Thank you.
All right, Haley.
Thanks so much. Just want to recognize the input from rural communities across Arizona. We've been working with them for a long time, and I think you're seeing it reflected in this proposal. So Audubon's very supportive, and we look forward to next steps in advancing this, and both to the governor as well as in the legislative process. So thank you.
Thanks. Ron.
Thank you, Director. Ron Doba. I'll be very brief. We recognize the framework proposal is very broad. It's going to need some more refinement as it goes through the process, but we do support moving this framework forward.
Thank you. Chairman Miguel.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and address you in my language before I address you in English, but I just want to say in my language, agan ba mabod ogcho ami action amjot manda matamo ai matamo taiwa api da kumnya ka matamo sapnyu kut ka shudak prida shudak matamo sapai chu sapai chutma matot ma ka thim dak upam ka upam mandamo sapin tad mandamo muim jiba ia mandamo datewa matamo sapai chu nyok sapai chu matamo sapai chu kuk budget ida but shudak إذا تهمتك إذا صفحة جو budget. And in short, just want to say that, when I was younger, I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandfather happened to be chairman of my community when I was much younger. And one of the things that he told me more than anything was to protect our water, to really identify that water was very, very important to our community and our way of life. The Auction Indian community is a 22,000 acre tribe. 16,000 of it is designated to agriculture. So obviously, water is really, really key to our way of life. It's taught us a number of things. Our tradition and culture stems from water, and it continues today. And so it's really significant that we do, again, appreciate the fact that now we're at the table with you all, and you guys are including us in these efforts overall. Now, they didn't have the dilemma back then as they did now as far as water overall within the state. But I'll tell you right now, and I can probably speak for the tribal leaders, our forefathers, our members, our leaders who are not here today are shedding tears of joy knowing that we're at the table today. So we really, really appreciate and thank each and every one of you for allowing us to be here at the table. It means so much to us. Again, we could say it's been a long time coming, but you know what? We're here today, and that's all that matters. So again, it's emotional for me because, again, my grandfather probably wanted to be at the table a long time ago, and other leaders, but we're here today, and we're fulfilling their dreams and their efforts and wanting to work with the state as we come across a major problem. And so, again, thank you for that. With that, I'm going to go ahead and make a final statement here. I have appreciated being a part of this process and all the work that has gone into it. And as I shared at the last Rural Groundwater Committee meeting, while nothing is perfect, this is a start. And we know we need to do something and that all of Arizona must be involved. We also know this package will change as it moves through the legislative process. The additions about tribal engagement are important, and I appreciate AWR's commitment to working with tribes as the package works its way through the legislative process. We've discussed ways the agency can coordinate with tribes throughout this session, either through ITCA or one-on-one or through the relationships we have been developing during these discussions around this table and online. I trust that they'll do that, and therefore I'm in support of moving this framework onto the governor for the next steps. I want to thank each and every one of you for the job you have done and the contributions you have made to this point. I appreciate each and every one of you for your efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman Miguel. Jamie, then Spencer.
Thank you. Mojave County has long advocated for tools to be made available for rural groundwater water management. We date back to the days of retired Supervisor Watson and Representative Cobb starting the process. We acknowledge that there is work to be done, but we believe that what do we call them? The recommendation for the rural groundwater management area is a great starting point, and we support moving it forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Spencer.
We appreciate the hard work that's gone into this and the time. We have obviously, from my position on the Assured Water Supply Committee, we haven't had a deep dive into this concept. Obviously rural Arizona has a desire to address their groundwater problems and has, voiced concern about the lack of tools in the toolbox, so to speak. And we appreciate that and understand that. But having said that, there's a lot of uncertainty here. And, in the AMA context, the at least regulatory environment for water for sale housing is very clear and certain. That AMA process isn't working out real well for me so far, but it's clear. That was a joke. It's clear and it's certain, and we understand that. And so, we have some hesitation here because of the lack of certainty. And I know the details aren't worked out. I know that this kind of concept is a concept that's got consensus and wants to move forward. We appreciate that. But, my industry in the uncertainty we have faced over the last year, we desperately need certainty, and we desperately need housing in the state of Arizona. And any lack of certainty, any lack of uniformity as it relates to the standards we need to meet to move forward costs money. And we run from uncertainty to certainty. And so because of that, we do have some concerns as this moves forward.
Thanks, Spencer. And I'll just say the issue you wrote up about not yet having a deep dive chance. For any of you who haven't had a chance to do a deep dive because you've been on opposite committees, so to speak, my staff's ready to have conversations with you. Just contact Carol or Bruce and we can set up times to talk with you. We've tried to do some of that prior to this meeting, but I think it would be helpful to do that deeper dive, and happy to make our staff available to any of you that want to do that. Leslie.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Leslie Myers with the Salt River Project. The Salt River Project is a water provider, but in rural Arizona, and on our power side, we're also a rural water user. I have spent the majority of my career working with many of you in rural Arizona on water issues, and I absolutely understand the importance of bringing together diverse viewpoints and interests and developing frameworks such as these. The Salt River Project supports moving this forward, and we look forward to participating in the further development.
Thanks. And I think Chairwoman Flores, I saw your name lighting up here a second ago. Would you like to comment? Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. I know it's getting late and we're well over the 12 o'clock, but thank you, Director Berchowski, for allowing me again to speak and have a say in this. It's been an honor to serve on this committee, Rural Groundwater Committee. I thank Governor Hobbs for creating this, even though it's under more or less dire straits of, where we are with our circumstances of the climate and with the shortage of water. But nonetheless, I've learned a lot. Hopefully we'll continue to learn more about rural groundwater. But this is a monumental step, I think, for all that's involved. Members for AEWR for the proposed framework that gives recognition to Arizona tribes well over 100 years, and echoing Chairman Miguel's statement about wanting to be involved. And so I think this is all a step in the right direction and moving forward, and we can be proactive instead of reactive. But having said that, I just want to say that give approval for the proposed framework recommendations and moving it on to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Flores. Representative Travers.
I know you can't play favorites with your children, but our subcommittee totally rocked. We had a really great group of people, and I think we all worked really well together, even though we all had some opposing views. So I really look forward to what we're going to continue to build with this, provided something hasn't already been dropped in the hopper. But thank you very much, and looking forward to going and moving forward with this.
Thank you. My children are over 30. They still try to get me to play favorites. Maria.
Thank you, Director. And thank you, members of the council. I'd just like to reiterate the words of Madam Chairwoman Flores, as well as Chairman Miguel. As you all know, I serve as the Executive Director of the Intertribal Council of Arizona, also known as ITCA, and I have the honor of working with all of the tribes here in Arizona on a daily basis. I'd just like to express ITCA's support for the Rural Groundwater Management Framework recommendations and express our appreciation not only for our inclusion in the process, but for recognizing the importance of tribes as partners in the water management within the framework. Thank you.
Thanks. Craig, did I see you raise your hand?
Thank you, Director. Craig Sullivan with the County Supervisors Association. Very respectfully, I have to submit that our association is not taking a position on moving this forward at this time. As you know, we have supervisors on both sides of the issue, some who care passionately about finding a path to provide additional support to their areas. These are folks that are seeing basins at risk that they feel very strongly are threatening the economic prosperity of their regions, and they're very pleased to see this framework on the table. Others are very concerned where facts may be on the ground very different for them, what this may mean. And so they're watching this very closely as well. I will share that in the conversations we've been having, the views of the supervisors are all very sincerely held on each side of the issue. Where we are unanimous on is our gratitude that the governor gave the counties an opportunity to plug into this process and to be at the table. And so we want to extend our appreciation for that, and also our commitment to continue on sharing information, working with all of you as anything migrates downstream, because we know these are very important issues and we want to be partners with you in the state as we go forward. And so I just wanted to put that on the record and thank you, Director and Patrick, very much for giving me the opportunity to do so.
Great. Brenda?
Thank you, Director. Brenda Berman for Central Arizona Project. We've seen how rural Arizona, how they manage their resources has been a tough issue for many years now. In the 3-county service area that is served by Central Arizona Project, the Groundwater Management Act and the Assured Water Supply Program have been effective tools in managing groundwater resources in these active management areas. We support smart water management, but as the various rural groundwater management proposals that have been brought forward over the years, CAP has not taken a position on them. We typically take positions on bills that impact our operations, including the Colorado River, with a particular focus on our service territory. And this proposal would not impact CAP in these ways. We acknowledge that there have been varying opinions on this issue, and we look forward to the parties continuing their discussions.
Thanks, Brenda. I think we have Chris next.
Thanks, Director. So I want to say that right now there's 2 Arizonas, right? There's an Arizona mostly within the AMAs where residents do experience certainty and water security. And then there's the rest of us in rural Arizona, nearly 1.3 million of us who don't have water certainty or water security, because right now under the status quo, anyone can come in, sink a well, pump as much as they want for free, drain aquifers without consequence. And we've been seeing over the years more and more consequences of that. And like Jamie said, more and more rural communities have come forward seeking solutions, looking for alternatives that allow for flexibility and local choice in dealing with local groundwater issues. And I think we see in this proposal those insights and input from rural communities in this proposal. And we know there's a lot of work to do as we now look towards the legislative session, but we're certainly supportive of moving this recommendation forward. We think it's important for ensuring the long-term sustainability of our rural economies, rural communities, and our local farms and ranchers. Everyone benefits from water certainty. And so we're really appreciative of the leadership and courage by each one of the Rural Groundwater Committee members who stuck it out and hashed it all out in difficult conversations. And we look forward to continued work on this.
Thanks, Joe Singleton.
Thanks, Tom. I think I'll echo Sandy's comments. I think as a framework, it's pretty good. I don't think it's a final product. As we all know, there'll be more public process in front of it for it to go to, and it'll change a little. So I don't think what's written in front of us is an end, but maybe it's the end of a beginning. And maybe it's a beginning that's time has come and needs to go forward and get some additional authorities and tools out there for the rural folks to decide how they feel about their water management challenges and how to reflect their values in those solutions. So I support moving this forward. I'd like to say on a related issue, just because I promised myself I always would, some of the stuff in here where it says things like contact the department for technical assistance after yours as a DWR employee myself, I experienced a lot of mission creep. So I would hope as this thing develops and the time comes that it is actually recognized in the DWR budget appropriation moving forward. Thank you.
If not, we'll prioritize. Cynthia.
The City of Phoenix appreciates and congratulates the Rural Groundwater Committee on the very difficult work that they've worked on in this proposal and supports submitting this to the governor as a foundation.
Thanks. Are we missing anyone else? Clark?
Thank you, Tom. We appreciate so much the council taking on this issue and discussing it. As someone who's focused on development in the Phoenix AMA, we understand that these issues can oftentimes impact our ability to chase capital as it can affect the perception of the state. So we look forward to the further discussions and seeing how this discussion continues to evolve. Thank you.
Thanks. So, Ben, I see your face now. You must have unmuted yourself. So go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly, Navajo Nation also expressing its support for this recommendation. And I want to thank Dr. Crystal Tully Cordova from the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, who was following this committee's work before I officially asked to join it. And she's done tremendous work for us. And good work to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else online?
Director Bushatsky, this is Robin Sayed from State Land.
Ed?
I just wanted to say that we are supportive of moving this recommendation forward. It provides opportunities for groundwater management that establishes goals and management plans to support local needs. As you know, state land is foundational for many rural communities through its customers. So acknowledgement of existing uses under the proposal's goals and management plans will ensure that the state land department can continue to generate revenue for the state's beneficiaries while ensuring resources continue to be available long term. We'll be obviously watching this as it moves forward. If, as things are implemented, state land will be sure to request additional resources that may be necessary to ensure that we have appropriate plans and consultation protocols in place. And we look forward to continuing to work with the Department of Water Resources to ensure that our actions and decisions are compatible. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Last call online or in the room. I'm not hearing or seeing any requests. So it's clear again that we have a very broad support to move this recommendation forward. And again, understanding there's lots of details. People have some concerns with specific elements of the framework, and we need to work out legislation, and there'll be opportunity for those here and others to be involved in that discussion. So we do have one more issue, and instead of calling you here on December 26th and being the Grinch that stole Boxing Day, I'll ask Bruce to go immediately to the council recommendation slide for the next issue.
Thank you, Tom. This is really a two-pronged proposal. Essentially, what we're asking for is additional opportunity for DWR to collect more data. As you know, it's very, very important that you get a better understanding of aquifer situation within these basins. And so this is a two-pronged recommendation. Under number one, we have 4 different items here we want to go through, but under number 1, ADWR should pursue additional measuring, monitoring, and collection of groundwater data to more fully assess basin aquifer conditions. So that would be monitor wells, potentially other index wells to get a better understanding of aquifer conditions. Number 2, DWR should investigate the utilization of emerging technologies, and many of those have been discussed during committee meetings, but technologies such as ET or remote sensing to analyze conditions and to supplement water use data. And then the second piece of this is
is really a financial assistance program, a rebate per se, where ADWR should provide financial assistance for non-exempt well measuring devices in unregulated areas of the state in exchange for voluntary annual reporting from well users. Really what this is focused in on is a voluntary program where if an individual is interested in installing a metering device and they want to participate with the Department of Water Resources in receiving a rebate, in exchange for the rebate in installing this device, they would be required to annually report from their well. So that is a voluntary program offered to users outside of regulated areas that essentially DWR providing this rebate. And then secondly, DWR number 4, DWR should provide financial assistance for non-exempt well measuring devices in newly regulated areas of the state. So this would include the Hualapai INA, would also include the Douglas AMA, and would also include potentially any new rural groundwater management areas that would be created.
Questions for Bruce on any of 1 through 4? I'll first say on number 1, one might ask, why can't DWR do this now? We can. If I don't have the resources made available to me in terms of me having to make decisions about prioritizing workload with my existing resources, this recommendation would be helpful in that process for me. So questions for Bruce? Ed?
Bruce, you know where I'm going. And that is that as growers, we're worried about individual information. Is there any possibility of the information that comes from the meters being aggregate rather than individual?
So Ed, I'll respond and say, as we work through the details in this recommendation, I'm not going to throw out that possibility now, but as we heard from DWR hydrology staff, the value to us of having the individual water use information tends to be creating the creation of these numerical groundwater models that can better make projections of future conditions and then assess the different actions that might come forward under this framework and what they might do moving forward. So I would ask you to consider that in terms of the individual reporting.
So Tom, if I can throw in, I'm absolutely with you. We're not against it, but we're worried about that being publicized. Some of us have been crucified from other information public, and it really hurts our communities. So we were hoping to have it at least somewhat private. Obviously, for you guys, you need all the information, and we're for that.
Thanks, Ed. Other questions? John?
Yeah, just more of a comment on the financial incentives for the volunteers to be part of this program. I would say use the term of incentive would be, coming from a municipality that has a large conservation program, proactively providing financial assistance to people that get on the program as opposed to rebating them after purchases are made, would probably get better volunteerism in that arena. So my suggestion.
Hey, John. Others? Joe?
Following up on the financial assistance, does DWR currently have a funding stream or a current mechanism to be able to distribute funds? Would a new one have to be created or new authorizations, et cetera? Because I'm not sure what the magnitude of funding assistance we'd be talking about here.
Joe, we have some funds available to us for, I'll use the term broadly, conservation activities, and I think we're assessing whether or not connected to the source of those funds, we could potentially use it for these purposes. Any other questions? We'll move forward then to those who want to speak regarding to moving this recommendation forward. Who would like to go first? Anyone? Ron and then Sandy.
Thank you, Director. Ron Doba from NAMWA. Recognizing Mr. Curry's concerns about the information and hoping that it can possibly be addressed as this moves forward. I think that our position is that we would like to see this proposal move forward to the governor.
Thanks. Sandy?
Thank you, Director. Sandy Favorites of Freeport. Um, Happy to recommend or to support this proposal moving forward with adequate funding for the department to adequately and robustly implement it. I think that's a key element here, this, that's in order to do this. I think the recognition of trying to aggregate data, there are ways that I believe it can be done to provide the at least generally some hydrologic information that could be useful. And I would encourage the department and the council as this moves forward to consider those. And if folks have, ideas on how that can be done, I think we need to put our heads together to do that, to get over that hump. I don't believe it goes far enough. I don't. This issue is a long-standing issue. If we're going to create these groundwater management areas, assess whether we're going to do new active management areas, give the department the tools it needs to do it right, rather than on hearsay and perceptions that certain things are happening within an aquifer. These are not homogeneous, bathtubs. They're very, very diverse across these basins, and so exploring further some sort of mandatory reporting with the caveat of maybe there's ways to aggregate and look at how to protect data, sensitive data for folks. I think it's something that we need to consider moving forward. You're going to create these things. You're going to have opposition to creating these things because people are going to say, well, there's no problem. Other people are screaming there is a problem. We need to solve that mystery once and for all and move that forward. In addition, to that, I would like to recommend, or at least for a future recommendation, is more funding for a more robust index well program. That program, one or two index wells in one part of a basin is but basically crap. It's just bunk. And it's not something that you can really make a good recommendation on management for. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for saying a bad word. I apologize. But, I think that's important. And this, we're happy to provide the data today. We'll do it today. We got nothing to hide. We have nothing to be ashamed of. And I don't think anybody is saying that they are ashamed of providing data just because they want it aggregated. I think there are other issues out there that are very sensitive and very important for the longevity of water users, real water users in Arizona, who need to protect their future. And I think this is something we just need to consider, but making this more robust would be something that I would hope for. That'll be on my Christmas list next to world peace.
Haley and then Jamie. All right, thanks. Jamie.
Mojave County Water Authority would support this proposal. I'm not clear though, is it to be a rule at DWR? Is it going to be passed on for legislation?
So I think a lot of this has to be legislation.
Well, in that case, we agree with Freeport. It should be mandatory, but voluntary or non-regulatory. This proposal is a great starting place. It will tell you whether or not, in a couple of years, whether or not you're getting enough data and whether or not you need to move to a mandatory. So we support moving it forward.
Joe Singleton.
Thanks, Tom. I'm not sure that we can credibly do anything called management without some additional information, so I support moving the proposal forward.
The record, I have thumbs up from Kathy and Representative Travers. Do you want to say anything as well? Kathy?
I just want to say there's a reason you sat me next to another ex-director of the department. Great minds think alike. You absolutely have to have more data and you have to have more money. And we are foolish if we think that we can get by without either one of them. So I support this, but I would totally agree that it needs to be, going forward at some point, we need to do more.
John,
Thank you. City of Tucson supports this moving forward as well. Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, I just want to bring up that mandatory metering can be problematic for agriculture, logistically, economically, confidentiality, and reiterate that there are a lot of good tools that have come about in the last 3, 4, or 5 years and are advancing from satellite data and modeling. I've been in that field for the last 8 years, and some of the scientists I work with are just super excited at the capabilities. So I just really want to encourage looking at whether data from those tools, as I know you have, would be sufficient, if not, if not perfect, but sufficient for this purpose.
There could be a piece of it, again, and let's not lose sight that it's not just mandatory metering. There are reporting methods that we use in the AMAs that are approved by DWR that don't require an actual meter. Chris?
Certainly, Chrissy Dahl, Agribusiness Water Council. We certainly support the proposal. Some may be a little bit ambiguous, but we support this skeletal framework and look forward to a lot of agricultural input into the process of putting meat on the bones.
Chris, Karen Peters?
Thank you. I would reiterate my comments earlier and just say that we would benefit from the data as well. More data allows for data-driven decisions. So the department supports this moving forward.
Thanks. And staff have reminded me to, again, read Sharon Megdal's comment sent to us by email. It reads, as a member of the Rural Groundwater Committee, I wish to express my support for the measuring and reporting proposal. Anyone else? Joe?
Charleston Metro Water District and SAWA. Certainly want to say I support this proposal. This has been a perennial issue that's come up to nearly every legislative session for the past decade plus. So I'm excited to see this moving forward.
Thank you. We haven't heard from many online. Anyone online who we haven't heard from?
Just Robin saying with State Land again. State Land is supportive, obviously, of moving this recommendation forward. We're in favor of, any future efforts to pursue additional data collection through monitoring wells. And we're happy to support efforts while minimizing impacts to current state land lessees. I'll keep it at that. Thank you.
Thanks. Bitta?
Yeah, quickly, Navajo Nation supports as well. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Okay, we're getting to last call.
Senator,
See
for
other
your
thumbs up.
consideration, I'll jump in.
Yes.
Finally,
Senator.
but not to add anything else really, because I think our former DWR directors said it extremely well, and I support that. And data is fundamental to management. So thank you for putting this forward.
Any other last calls for the record? So again, clearly, with more work to be done and fleshing out some of the details of each one of these items, heard clearly support for funding for DWR. We will pass these recommendations on. So we'll move to closing remarks, and I appreciate everybody sticking late for this meeting. So I will be drafting a letter outlining the council's recommendations as soon as possible for transmittal to the governor. It'll include those statements as you approve them specifically. And I hope to have that done by the end of the day today, at least, if not sooner. I want to then talk about moving forward. We know that there's going to be stakeholder discussions on all of these items that we approved, both at this meeting and the prior October council meeting. But we know that there's been other issues raised by the council. DWR has kept track of all of those issues that have been raised in either the council discussions or in the committee process. We're going to sit back and assess those issues against these 5 recommendations that I'm transmitting to Governor Hobbs. We'll then create a list of those outstanding issues and talk with Patrick and Governor's Office staff about how we might move forward, what we might want to do next for the council. Also recognizing that there may be other issues that have not even come to the fore yet in terms of water management improvements we can make moving forward. So with that, I think we have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish today. And Patrick might want to make closing remarks as well.
I might. I see folks getting fidgety, so I'll keep them brief. We've got the revolving door of alternates stepping up to the table, but I just want to reflect 6 months ago, the governor convened this group in this room. And I'm looking around this room and I'm seeing tribes, cities, agriculture, rural Arizona, water providers, legislators, our cabinet officers. And this has really been a robust process where we have done some really important and critical work. These groups have had 20+ meetings, public sessions, really intense, robust policy conversations, live streamed. And this just scratches the surface of the extraordinary efforts that went into this process, right? This is a process on top of all of your existing obligations and works on behalf of your organizations. And we've also asked you to represent constituencies beyond your organizations, and that's an immense amount of work. It's also been an immense amount of work from the Department of Water Resources, who are in the business of running the state's water management programs, as well as this policy development forum and the facilitation of these meetings in this process. So I really want to express my thanks to this group. You know, the governor charged the council with taking action and providing her with recommendations by the end of the year. And it's no accident the challenges that she identified, right? Groundwater challenges in urban and rural Arizona. And we have been confronting these issues for years. We have been dealing with unmet demands and assured water supply issues in the Pinal AMA for years. We have been dealing with water providers relying on groundwater in communities trying to get designated for years, and there's been no movement on these things. We've known for decades in rural Arizona that they do not have the sufficient tools to protect their finite groundwater resources, the inheritance of these communities that their economic and futures rely on. And yet in 6 months, this council has come up with proposals that will lead to sustainable development and reduce groundwater pumping, benefiting our aquifers within the AMAs, closing long-standing loopholes around assured water supply programs, and putting together a foundation for addressing rural groundwater management. And I think we should really acknowledge the work and the monumental efforts that have gone into this. It hasn't been easy. Frankly, this council meeting today was a bit of a microcosm of the last 6 months. We've got folks who don't think things go far enough or think things go too far. We've got people on different sides of the table opposing viewpoints, but we have a very broad representation of water interests at this table, and we have developed legitimate, productive policy solutions that are a product of compromise. This state has been known internationally and nationally for its groundwater management, and we need to continue to uphold that legacy and move it forward. And I think the work this group has done over the last 6 months is absolutely a step in that direction. So I just want to express my thanks to everyone here, everyone online who's been participating, the public who's been watching this. There's been a lot that's going into this. We have a lot more to do on the implementation side, administratively in some cases, legislatively in others, and your participation will be important in those venues as well. So we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick, and I'll express my thanks to the council members as well. I also want to definitely thank DWR staff. You could imagine for every 2-hour council committee meeting, et cetera, or 2-hour and 44-minute meeting, as the case might be, there's days of work that go into it with multiple staff people. Most of them are sitting behind me or beside me. And so we should celebrate how far we've gotten to date in getting these recommendations approved by the council, supported by the council, and getting them off to Governor Hobbs. And we can take maybe 2 breaths because there's no respite. There's no, okay, let's sit back for a couple of days. We got to keep moving this forward. We have a lot of work to do to close and get involved in the details, as Patrick mentioned, with all of these recommendations that have been made, and we're not going to stop here among staff at DWR. I might let them take off on the 25th of December, but no, they've been very committed, and I think, like most of you, they're motivated by the desire to move our state forward in water management. So happy holidays to all of you. Hopefully, I will see some or most of you at Colorado Water Users Association in a couple of weeks. We'll talk about our other big issue that so far this council hasn't had to address, but that's still hovering over us in a big way. So thank you to everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Can we also say thanks to Trent for coordinating all of his two subcommittees and all the slides?
Thank you, Trent.
and everything?